Welcome to Leadership Development News, Profiles and Practice of Top Performers. I'm Dr. Relly Nadler, Dr. Kathy Greenberg, and I have been doing this show, Leadership Development News, for 20 years now. And we're really, really happy to bring on one of our guests, Dr. Stein. We've known Stephen with the EQI 2.0. I've been using it since 2001. Kathy and I both got certified in 2011. And so Stephen basically has multi-health systems, and we'll do a little bit more intro where the EQI is. And I know a lot of our fans who listen to us are fans also of emotional intelligence. So we're really happy to have him, and he's going to talk about some of the connections with who we are as leaders through reality TV. So this will be interesting. He's been a consultant to many reality TV shows, so kind of behind the scenes. So a couple things, about emotional intelligence, why we are fans of it. 92% of top leaders are high in emotional intelligence. And when we think about everything that's going on now, there's kind of these four key challenges. Everything is more now. So when you think about whatever's going on, any emotions that we're going to talk about from these reality TV shows or you as a leader, it's more anxiety, more stress, more pressure than ever before. And then if you think about that we don't know that much about ourselves. Emotional self-awareness is always kind of a key issue, and we don't know much about ourselves. We think we know more, but we don't. And then the third key thing is we're on autopilot as much as 95% of the time. So here's all this stuff going on. We don't know that much about ourselves. We're on autopilot, and we don't do, which all of us as leaders or coaches should do, slow thinking, reflect. And so that's just kind of where we're at. And I think with AI, everything's going to get more, we've outsourced our thinking. So a lot of what we're trying to do for you as leaders and team leaders and executives, how do you think slower? What are the key things that you could and should do? And then what do you do with these emotions? Kathy and I, in our book, Emotional Brilliance, if you see that behind her in her background, we have something called NAME, NAME. You have to notice and name your emotions. That's the end. You have to accept it, which is really hard, but understand and accept it. You have to manage it. Dr. Stein will talk about some of the managing of emotions. And then you got to express it, and you got to be selective again. Sometimes we express it and it's to the wrong person. So NAME, what do you do with emotions? Kat, welcome.
Hey, Relly, it's good to be here today. It's my birthday, and I'm really happy that we have our
Whoa.
friend Dr. Steven Stein with us. And I just want to say a little bit about how Steven has impacted my life and my work. And of course, our viewers, our listeners have heard for what, 20 years now, how you have influenced me, Relly. But I'm going to just give the spotlight today to
That's
Steven, if that's okay. Stephen probably doesn't know that for almost 2 decades, his work has taken a huge footprint in my world, largely thanks to you, Relly, for introducing me to him. And I think one of the things I want to make sure our audience hears is that we have graduated 50 coaches from our Magnus One coach certification for first responders in 2025 and 2026. And that means that all of our coaches start with the foundation of an emotional intelligence certification featuring the multi-health systems EQI 2.0. Everything they learn is from that basis. And we train them with 66 ICF accredited hours to become professional coaches. And we're very proud of that. And bringing that to public safety has been not only an award winning experience, but for me, a life changing experience. And we just are in the process now of our second largest grant with an organization that is in public safety to bring this profound EQI based coaching program to them in 2027. And I will deliver the good news very soon. But let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Steven Stein. He is a world renowned clinical psychologist, entrepreneur, an expert in emotional intelligence, hardiness, and human behavior. And as founder and executive chair of Multi Health Systems, MHS, he has spent more than 4 decades helping leaders and organizations better understand what drives performance, teamwork, and success. Beyond his work with organizations around the world, Dr. Stein is known as the psychologist behind dozens of reality television productions, as Relly said, and there he has helped assess and support contestants while gaining unique insights into leadership, relationships, conflict, and group dynamics. You can learn a lot more about him and the great people at MHS by going to https://mhs.com/about-us. You can also reach Stephen at Steven.Stein, that's Steven.Stein at MHS.com. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Wow, thank you. What a great introduction. Thank you so much, Kathy. I have to live up to that.
I'm sure you will. So, Stephen, we got some really great questions. So, one of the questions that I don't think we've asked you, we'll start and then we'll get into the reality, all the things about kind of what we can learn. It's like a snapshot of a microcosm of our world with this reality TV. But how did you get interested in emotional intelligence? Both Kathy and I have our own stories, but I don't think I've heard yours.
Well, it happened a long time ago. When we started MHS, we were basically in clinical psychology area. So we were dealing or measuring things like depression, anxiety, ADHD, all those sort of negative mental health areas. And what happened was we were looking to understand the other side. Instead of what goes wrong with people, how do we start to understand what goes right with people? And it was around that time I was on a speaking tour and I met with Dr. Reuven Bar-On, who had spent his time, done his doctoral dissertation in that very question, in trying to understand why do some people excel in life and some people flounder, have a difficult time. And he was on the beginning of developing this tool and this way of understanding it. And at that time, and nobody was accepting it. He was rejected by all the major test publishers and all. Nobody could really see a value in it. And we saw a value in it. We thought, wow, this is really an interesting way to go. If we start looking at what helps people become successful in life, maybe we can use that to help people who are both not doing well as people who are doing well but want to do much better in their life. And that's how we originally got involved in the area of emotional intelligence.
When was that? I'm just curious. How
That was in
long?
the early 1990s,
Okay.
around the same time that Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer were
Right.
doing their work. And of course, we work with them as well. They published the first paper on emotional intelligence in 1989. And so it was more theoretical at the time. But again, they wanted a way to measure it. And that's when we started working with them and a tool called the Mesquite, which is a behavioral way of measuring emotional intelligence.
Things have really changed. I'm in the middle of writing a new book called Global Leadership Future Proof, based on a book I wrote with Marshall Goldsmith and a couple of colleagues back in 2002 called Global Leadership Next Generation. And we've come so far since then in our understanding of the impacts that technology have on us and the impacts that it's having on our emotional intelligence. And a lot of great thought leaders these days, especially a good friend of mine, Cornelia Walthers, a fellow at University of Penn, writes that emotional intelligence is being stunted by AI because the language that all these chatbots are using is very limiting from an emotional standpoint. And many of us live our lives with the guilty pleasure of watching reality TV show, right? And we love to see the explosions and the drama and all this, craziness that we could actually experience in our own lives if we would just turn it up a notch, or maybe even turn it down a notch in my case. But, what do these shows that, that make us so happy in many instances, surprisingly teach us about leadership or team dynamics or organizational culture. I'm really curious.
So what you're saying is true. It's a reflection of us and a reflection of how we behave or people we know around us behave in real life, although it's magnified, it's on steroids. One of the things that really interested me in this, when we very started talking about emotional intelligence over 20 years ago, people thought it was a joke. They thought it was an oxymoron. They didn't know what it was. One of the most frequent questions I got asked by the media when we're doing all this media work was, isn't this just another fad? Isn't this just going to disappear like, re-engineering and management by objective? This is going to be forgotten in a few years, right? And here we are over 25 years later, and it's as hot as can be. But my answer at the time was, as long as there's more than two people in the world, emotional intelligence is going to be important, right? If everybody disappears, but we still have two people left, they're going to need emotional intelligence to survive. So where that leads me in terms of reality TV is kind of one of the best social experiments we could find. We get to isolate people. We get to put them into certain situations, and we get to see how they react. Who emerges as a leader? Who becomes a pain in the ass? What are all these roles that we see? And that's what we've been
Yeah.
doing, is trying to identify these roles. In real life, when we've been doing our research in emotional intelligence, we hire people, we put them in a job. It takes us a year or so to figure out if they work, they don't work, what's wrong with them. We've got like 10 weeks or less in reality TV. It all comes out really quickly. So it's another way of validating our
Yeah.
tools. We assess all these people before they go on the shows. We
Huh.
see how they behave, who lasts, who gets thrown
Yeah.
out, who's
Yeah.
the clown, who's the hot mess. And we can see how well things like the EQI is able to predict what happens in real time as it's happening before not only our eyes, but a million viewers watching this thing
Yeah.
unfold. So it presented to me when I had the opportunity to get involved in this. It was a unique opportunity, It's like some of the early social psychology experiments we
Right.
read about, Milgram and Zimbardo, the prison experiment. But you can't do those in universities anymore. The ethics committees don't
Yeah.
allow it, right? But we can do it on reality TV because we have all the safety nets that you need to do this kind of stuff.
So that's beautiful. I love hearing that. My social psychology focus early in my 20s was working in these outward bound programs where the people came together for 23 days in a similar way. It's like, oh, okay, and I got to be a part of it, observe it, but also, direct. And you just see how people, because they're living together, how they emerge. And I guess similar in these reality TV shows. So I'm just curious, I know you probably give them the EQI. What else do you give them? And then like when someone hires you, what do they hire you for?
Okay, so we do a battery test, and of course, the battery changes depending on the type of the show. There's dating shows, there's social experiment shows, there's adventure shows, there's wilderness shows. So it really depends on what the producers are looking for. But emotional intelligence on any of the, whether it's a cooking show, emotional intelligence is part of all of these shows. And then everything else kind of varies. We have tests that measure anger, for example. Are people physically assaulted because we can't allow that? Or do they use relational aggression where they get at people behind their back? The stuff you see on The Housewives and some of these other shows. We use tests. Well, obviously, one of the most important things is mental health. So we have to make sure that the person is fit for this kind of production, that they don't have any serious mental health problems or addiction problems that would make it difficult for them, not a positive experience for them to be on the show. So that's those. It's a whole basket of things that we assess.
Yeah.
What I do on the show, again, that varies from show to show, but kind of in the biggest scenario, we start off by screening, which is a test battery and an interview.
Right.
We rule them out for the mental health components. And then I give a bit of a flavor of the personalities to the producers. I also meet with them just before the production starts to make sure they still want to do this. Some people get roped into it by their friends who say, "Oh, you'd be great on reality TV," and they have no idea what it is till they finally get to there. We're going to walk on the set. So I make sure before we start shooting that this is what it's about. Are you sure you know what you're getting into? You're willing to do this. Then I'm there throughout production, so sometimes stuff happens, right? Anxiety, depression, like things happen from the pressure of the production. So I'm there to help them, guide them through
Huh.
that. And then we do a debrief at the end. I have
Wow.
to prepare them for what's to come.
Yeah.
Sometimes they think they're being just a great person, but they're this villain. Everyone hates them. I have to prepare them for the social media onslaught that they're going to get once they walk out of the door of production. People hate them, and how you going to deal with that? And it's like, oh my God, I thought I was being this great character on the show, when in fact they were being pretty nasty. So preparing them for what's to come afterwards. And then sometimes we do some aftercare as well. So we'll see how they're doing. And a lot of times, the productions may not be live. It may not be on air for another 2 or 3 months while it's in a post production. So sometimes we have to be there during the actual airing of the show to
Mm,
make sure the person is okay. Because,
mm.
oh, I didn't know you were going to show me like that. I didn't really, but was that you? Did you really say those things? Yeah, but I didn't know that was going to be, but you signed on for this. So,
Wow.
so there's a whole bunch of touch points that I get involved with throughout the production.
Well, I can say with all honesty, I wish you were with me when I was being, I'll say, tested for a reality TV show. It was
Oh.
fascinating. I had cameras everywhere for a period of time, and the way I protected myself was I owned the camera and I owned the footage. And as the executive producer, I had final say. And I have to tell you, and the audience will probably have a chuckle here, they made me out to be the worst villain in the world. It was a show that would have competed, believe it or not, with an earlier version of what we know now as the Kardashians called The Momager. And it was going to be a WeTV program, and I was cast as the CEO mom. And my role in my family was to basically tell everybody what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and why to do it. And the show opened up with a bulldog with painted nails at a laptop computer and then faded to me. I
Oh,
say no more. We're going to go to a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Steve Stein about how do you identify some reoccurring archetypes that make TV better watching. Don't go away. You're listening to Leadership Development News.
Welcome back to Leadership Development News, Profiles and Practice of Top Performers. We're talking with our good colleague and friend for many years, Stephen Stein. The three of us have done some presentations together, and so it's really great to hear from Stephen taking this to this snapshot world of reality TV. And so, Stephen, maybe if you can just share, I know at one point you did Fear Factor. It sounds like you've done a lot more now. And then then these archetypes, like what are the archetypes that you see? Because that's some of the transition. These archetypes are in our world, they're in leadership. So like, if you can, what shows have you done? And then anything about the archetypes you've noticed?
Okay, so I've done dozens and dozens of shows, and some of them are like the major franchises, the Canadian edition, and some are international. So it would be things like Big Brother, Canada, The Amazing Race, Canada, Master Chef. I work with Mr. Beast on the Beast Games, if you saw that on Amazon Prime, I think it was. Uh, Cooking shows, baking, the Great Canadian Baking Show. It just goes on and on and on.
Wow.
Canada Shore, which is like Jersey Shore. Um, yeah, there's so many.
Yeah, all
Can't even list them all. There's probably 60, 70 shows that I've worked on. In terms of the archetypes, what I find interesting and why I've gone that direction is that, archetypes are kind of patterns of behavior. And regardless of whether it's a survival show, a number of survival shows in the wilderness, or I did The Bachelor and Housewives shows, or social experiments like Big Brother, you always find these characters popping up. And you find that the most successful shows really has kind of a variety of these characters. So what are these archetypes? What are these characters? Well, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the villain, right? The person who everyone loves to hate. And a show often has to have someone on the cast who takes that villain role. And sometimes they don't even know they're the villain. It's someone who speaks their mind. I'm just speaking my mind, right? Although they insult 15 people along the way. So the villain is one of those common archetypes. Then we
I
have the
have no idea who that person is.
yeah, right, with the bulldog, I'm sure. You
right.
were being
Bulldog.
set up on that one. Interestingly, some people come on when we screen them, they want to be the villain, right? They get great admiration for being that villain. But we also have the hot mess express. That's the hot mess is the person who sort of comes into the room, everyone's sort of having a conversation, and they throw something out, and it just explodes. It's like throwing a bomb. They
Right.
do things or say things.
Yeah.
On one cooking show, for example, one guy went and they're doing this breakfast, the five-star breakfast for everybody. And this one character goes out and he grabs the whole basket of eggs, like the eggs that were for all the other teams, and he grabs them all. And people just explode and go crazy. And they said, "What do you think you're doing?" He says, "I'm just making my creation," right? Like he had no idea that he was disrupting the whole thing. So the Hot Mess Express, we usually find in a lot of these shows. We also have comic relief. We have that person who's just naturally funny. You're laughing at them. They don't mean to be funny half the time, but they just are. So it always helps to have that. It sort of reduces some of the strain or stress or pressure that's going on. We have the over competitor. You probably work with somebody and all they want to do is do the best, be number one, the top salesperson. I don't care who I step on. I don't, my emotional intelligence doesn't matter. I just want to be number one on sales. So we have these over competitors in many of these shows, especially like you find them in The Amazing Race and some of these other shows where they just give it their all. The social butterfly, the person who just makes relations with everybody, but no deep relations with anybody,
Mm.
right? They think they're part of everybody's team, but everybody's suspicious of them because they're talking to all the other people as well on the other teams. So, so there's 12 of these archetypes that I've identified. And as you can see, they're probably in your workplace. People see them in the office, but maybe not as exaggerated as they end up on a reality show.
As you're talking here, I'm thinking about a couple of scenarios. One, there was a former Miss Virginia who will remain nameless to protect her, who was, in fact, on one of the MTV shows. She was an executive coach. She was brought on to actually coach teens that had phobias. For example, one was a reclusive. She only came out of her room to eat meals, and they couldn't integrate her into the family past her like 15th birthday. She just became isolated and had a lot of issues. And she was a really good coach, and she really identified with young women. That was her sweet spot. And it turned out that the director, who didn't use your services, obviously, who knew nothing about at least emotional intelligence from our scientific and research based standpoint, merely wanted drama for the screen. Because, of course, bleeding leads, right? People want to see that hot mess everywhere. And he would incite friction between her as the coach and the contestant, if you will, this actual child who they were trying to help. And the coach was given the story and the scenario that she was helping this person, and the parents were being told she was helping this person. But it was clear that the director was getting in there and creating, if you will, an tension, an undercurrent. Is that an archetype, and do you encounter this in your experiences? And do you see this as we do as coaches in the workplace? Somebody says, I want you to come in and help this person get better. They don't want that person to get better. They want an outsider to come in and prosecute and persecute and justify their reason for getting rid of them. I mean, it's kind of crazy, you know?
Yeah, it does happen. I don't like that when you have, false pretenses or false reasons for bringing it on. I think it's something that we have to deal with. I don't like working in a situation where you're misleading the person. What I find is when things get out of hand, or when a producer tries to make it overblow something, it's bad for everybody. It's bad for production. You've got 60 people, working in a scene and on a set, and you're holding up production because this person's misbehaving or just acting out or whatever. Nobody wants that. Not even the producers want that. So I'm able to balance it whenever something like that starts to arise, where we don't let that happen. We just remind production, you really want this shoot to go smoothly, because it's very expensive when things get out of hand. And when someone does get out of hand for some other reason, I mean, we can exclude someone from a show if they're really problematic. Fortunately, on my watch, it's pretty rare because we try and screen those people out. But it's amazing how many people come out of the shows they work on who find it a growth experience, who find it a positive experience. I ask them all the time on the exit what they felt of the experience. What did they get out of the experience? What did they learn from their experience?
Mm.
And I'm amazed. I would say something like 75 to 80% of contestants get something positive out of it. We just hear about the negative stuff all the
Right.
time.
Right.
Sure.
Well, so one of the things, Stephen, as us, Kathy and I, as coaches, and I'm sure in your role and people who are listening, in organizations, managing conflict. I mean, if there's one skill that I think leaders need and probably are underdeveloped, it's managing conflict. And we know the conflict comes from probably what I would call the reeling feelings. And, that it's out of control, exaggerated feelings, and therefore they got the stinking thinking. And so when you think about that, like, how do you make sense of that in conflict, and then the challenges that may present to leaders who aren't trained in it? I mean, no one particularly likes conflict, unless you're a professional fighter or something.
Right. Well, there's a couple important things there, especially using emotional intelligence. One is to understand that the conflict may not be what it seems on the surface, right? Each person is upset about something or wants something that they're not getting.
Yeah.
So the first thing is to be a good listener. That's where empathy comes in. And to find out, what's the real problem here with each person, each separately. One person, it may be they're not getting recognition. Another person, it may be you're not treating me well, or I want more money, whatever it is. And once you fully understand as a leader, without getting involved in the conflict, just trying to understand the conflict from each side, then maybe you can start piecing together solutions that deal with each person's needs, and not, getting into that we escalate things just because we disagree on this one small thing, and it just blows up because we misunderstand what people really want. So I think that's the crux of it, discovering what people really want, really need, and being able to help them move towards that. Too often, leaders may take a side, which is not great, even though you may agree more with one than the other. It's more than finding out, how can I help you get what you want? How can I help you get what you want? And if I can't help either of you, then we have to find another solution.
One of the things, and I'm going to direct this to both you and Relly, one of the things that we see both in reality TV contestants and in senior executives is that some people get stronger under pressure. And of course, Steve, you and I have both worked for years across public safety and the Department of Defense. Certainly outside of your work with reality TV show, you've had that experience. And we're very careful about how we use emotional intelligence assessments, especially the EQI. We always make sure that we do a pre and post feedback. We're not just assessing people to assess them and get some color coded graph that gives us everything in a box, right? You have to do those pre and post assessments to get it right. But we know that both TV contestants and senior executives, some people get stronger under pressure while others struggle. What have you learned? And really, I'll extend this to you as well,
Okay.
about the psychological factors that determine who succeeds when the stakes are really high.
Okay, well, I can start if you want on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
So,
go for it.
so that leads kind of our research in the area of hardiness.
Yeah.
And basically, which is a lot of that research comes out of the military, actually. My colleague, Paul Bartone, who was a senior psychologist in the US Army, did years of research looking at that very question. Why, especially in combat and in other areas, why do some people succeed more than others? And it boils down to three things. It's kind of a mindset. And the first one we call commitment. And commitment means, being engaged in life, having a purpose, having values, being really solid in terms of how you see yourself and the world around you. So commitment was really important, number one. Number two was control. Being able to understand what it is you can control versus what's beyond your control. I can worry all day long about the weather, but the weather's not in my control. But I can put on a raincoat if it's going to rain, right? So being able to differentiate those things within your control and beyond your control. And finally is the mindset of challenge. When stuff happens, I sort of step back and look at it as, okay, how can I solve this problem? Or how would so and so, this friend of mine that I trust, what would they do if they encountered this
Mhm.
problem? So being able to see change and novelty as something exciting, as an opportunity to learn and grow
Yeah.
instead of getting all sort of bogged down and wound up in it.
Yeah. And Stephen, I've used that with folks, and I like that model of your hardiness model. People can get that from another one from MHS. So then I would respond in addition to that, Stephen, is someone really has to master themselves, so that's where the self-control, that's where this taking a gap, between stimulus and response, and that's we're on autopilot, like I said earlier. So people who are really able to kind of step back, see the whole situation, that's probably where, see it as a challenge. And it probably is assessing what can I do, what can I do, what's it, so it is that reflection. And even if it's just a couple moments, versus reacting. So I think that's the way I would answer it. That, they really are able to manage their thoughts. They're really able to manage themselves, and they're really able to take a moment to just reflect and be proactive versus reactive.
One of the things I want to share with our audience, which I may have touched on in the past, is we have we have recently, Stephen, just so you're aware, Relly and I have gone through a program called Meet Yourself with Dr. Antoine Aid out of the Middle East, and he has affiliations with Cambridge University. And I'm about to go through a second round of his training. And what it is are the 54 genetic markers for behavior. And what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at EQIs of individuals and then looking at the genetic markers that are available to us. So in this case, it might be the people who've gone through the class. We just give them an EQI and look at the genetic markers to see things like stress tolerance or impulse control or problem solving, right? Just some core decision making components that you might not necessarily recognize as being genetic behaviors. I'm just curious, as you look at reality TV, which is often, compressed months of relationship dynamics and just a few intense weeks, what are some of the most common derailers
Mhm.
you see that make it kind of I don't want to say a preconceived conclusion by what you can assess them to
Mhm.
be in their true makeup, but things that are going to emerge under
Yeah.
certain conditions, and how do those same patterns appear maybe in organizations?
So the main thing is on the shows, everything's magnified. Someone refusing to pass you butter is like a big deal. But one of the things you can usually count on is relationships. It's really a lot of what explodes are relationships and how we deal with each other. And again, it's like the workplace. You didn't treat me well, or you didn't listen to me, or people not feeling heard, or neglected in some way. A lot of the explosions we get have to do with those interpersonal relationships, and that's a lot of the similarity we see in the workplace. People want to be treated well, they want to be treated fairly, and we get into situations, in highly competitive situations, where we don't treat other people well or fairly. So that's probably the biggest area we see where these explosions happen.
Mhm. So, on that topic, around the derailers, and it sounds like you're excluding mental health issues, but are there other maybe with the EQI kind of things that are highlight like, I'm not sure about this person. Like, I would think an obvious one is impulse control, which maybe if it's managed to a certain part could be a
Hey, wait
good
a minute. Don't talk about me on the show. It's I'm right here.
Well, well,
Yeah.
impulse control is really one of the ones that producers want to hear the most about because
Yeah.
they kind of like low impulse control, right? That makes good
Right.
TV.
Right.
So that's where we also have the sort of a negotiation. How much low impulse control is good versus bad? So you really want to have that sort of managed. And so we combine that with other scores to see how they deal with stress, and are they going to, suddenly explode when things don't go their way? So it's really a management process at that
Yeah.
point where we have to look at what we can do with that low impulse control.
And like
Well,
what's the range? We're going to go to a break in a minute, but what would be the range that, and some of the people who listen to us are certified in EQI, so we're getting a spec deeper on that. Like
In
what?
scores,
Yeah.
you can people get people with like 70s and 80s in their impulse control, uh, 65. You'll get some really low impulse control people who will, apply for these shows.
But is that kind of what you negotiate? They're low, but good and or high enough.
I don't like them that low personally. Again, depending on the nature of the show. If it's a
Yeah.
cooking show, it may not be so bad. Although I did have one cooking show where a guy got so angry he punched a fridge and broke his hand.
oh,
So you never know where the low impulse, is going to show up as an issue.
Right.
What you think is a nice,
well,
friendly show, and things turn, things can
yeah.
surprise you sometimes.
You just reminded me when you said the person, that passes the butter and does something that creates, an uproar because they don't pass the butter, right? They're asked to, but they don't. And in the TV movie Mortal Kombat, there's a scene that I use in my law enforcement training, which is the bad guy is learning from his team at a dinner table what kind of impulse control he has, because he asks one of his team members to pass the noodles, and the team members decide he doesn't deserve the noodles, And not only does he not deserve the noodles, he doesn't deserve anybody's respect and he doesn't deserve anybody's anything. And they put him in his place. Well, the bad guy gets so overwrought, he lets loose, and at the dinner table, obviously makes an attempt to get rid of his teammates, unknowingly doesn't have the skills, and the team, against his will, takes control. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about emotional perception and forming under pressure. What can we learn about these dynamics and organizational politics that we need to navigate? Don't go away. You're listening to Leadership Development News.
Welcome back to Leadership Development News, profiles and practices of top performers. And we're talking with Stein, who's been studying top performers. One of the uses of the EQI is this top performers survey. What are your top people doing? What are your people who are just average or meets expectations doing? So it's a good tool. Both Kathy and I are certified in it, and then we certify others if you're interested or you're interested in figuring that out for your team. But we got such an expert here who's been doing this for so long. And we know in the reality shows, and again, it's the emotional piece, that happens, is just these alliances. And the idea of these alliances on the show, they're formed and reformed. But even in the work world, I'm reminded of a CFO where I had done some coaching with him and his team. And every time he was talking in a meeting, he only talked to one person. And it was so obvious, but it wasn't obvious for him. And everybody else is going, why is he not looking at me? So how do you see this kind of alliances and how does that relate in the work world?
So these are archetypes that we see that they involve your ability to be social or interpersonal. So you can go from one extreme, which is a social butterfly, where you spend your time talking to everybody, going from person to person, or you could be that more competitive person, like the one you're suggesting, who would only deal with that person that they focused on, they cared about for one reason or another. But we also have those who are more strategic, those who know how to look at the different people in the room and see what their specific skills are. And again, that relies on emotional intelligence because you have to have the empathy to be able to read the room and read who's there, understand what their skill sets are. And that strategic person, and sometimes those are the ones who win these reality shows, can place everyone and knows when to use them.
Mm.
So I know that Joe was very argumentative. So maybe we'll put him when we have a difficult situation. That's when to place him. We know that everyone loves Mary, right? She's just such a friendly, nice person. She'll be our initial contact with the customer because she knows how to make them feel good. So that strategic mastermind, we call them, is able to really know their place and know everyone else's place and use people in that strategic way.
And it's fascinating to me that as much as we know about people in today's, I'll just say, AI charged environment, right? Because we understand that by taking let's say, letters or text messages or chats, right? And we can feed them to an AI bot and say, hey, can you give me an answer for this? Or can you help me with this? It doesn't really have context. And you can try and feed it context all you want. But if you don't see that person repetitively with an experience level of consistency in context, it's going to be really hard to help that person shift significantly. And the thing that I love personally about what MHS offers in all your assessments is that they're customized and they're very focused on small tiny things. We like to call them, as Relly says, micro things that have a macro impact. When you're looking at alliances or people's behavior or who to put where and what role, where does resilience or well-being, or as I love to call it, elasticity of identity, play into your capacity to help manage that change for that individual?
Well, resilience is really important in these situations because there's a lot of stress. And I spend a fair bit of time in the interviews with people asking how they manage stress. Have they ever had to quit something because it was too stressful? So really trying to understand where they are in terms of resilience and managing it, because that's where you test the metal, right? You have a million people watching you. You're in a situation where people are screaming at you. Like, how do you handle this? Like, how do you deal with it? So it's really important for people to be resilient and for them to sort of be able to be in the pressure cooker, to be able to take that. And it's a big skill that we look for, and we assess that with emotional intelligence.
So, your assessment, like you mentioned, with the three C's, control, challenge, commitment, that that's really helpful. So, when we think about people or love watching these shows, and I think it's because, and Kathy mentioned it earlier, it's just the excitement and the unknown, and I think they resonate with that. What's going to happen, but so I think what's uh, can be more telling is when they're watching this, anything that you would advise them to do to think about themselves. So how do we turn entertainment, which is very engaging, into a self-learning?
Well, I think that's really the reason why most people watch it because they see themselves or their neighbors or their coworkers, and either that's the person I want to be, right? The hero, or oh my God, I hate that person, the villain. That's my boss. How am I going to deal with someone like, and they can watch how they're
Uh-huh.
dealt with in that context. Someone stands up to them and they say, well, wow, I wonder if I could stand up to my boss in the same way. So there's a real projection on the one hand or an
Yes.
identification on the other hand. And that's what makes it so appealing. I'm always amazed when I tell people I'm working on this show or that show, and they're so emotional about certain characters. They get so turned on. Like, and I say, what is it about that character? And clearly there's something in their own personal life that they've had to deal with that, that character reminds them of, as a piece of them. So it really is. We get invested in these strangers that we have nothing to do with because of those characteristics.
There's something here, though, too, that's extremely interesting to me. And that's the dynamics of trust and
Mm,
influence.
Mhm.
mm,
And what you see a lot of coming out of reality TV shows are brands, Um, some of the housewives have turned their brands into mega millions, whether it's drinks, skinny food, clothing, restaurants, right? The whole Vanderpump organization. Tell me a little bit about your experience with recognizing in these TV contestants which ones are there to build their brand, maybe, and
mm.
which ones are there to impact the audience in a positive
Yeah.
way to get them on their team, if you will, when they leave the show.
That is such a great question because those are things that are so important in terms of what we see. So, and one of the things I really love about this is because I interview I call them kids. The kid who's in his mother's basement playing video games, who can't get a job, who's really not doing anything in life. We put them on a reality show, and suddenly they explode and become famous. And they have brand. They build a brand, and bars pay them $500 just hang out, and women, for example, will come just to meet them and see them. I mean, this blows me away. You have the the person who does nothing in life, and we make a star out of them.
Right.
There are people, and I guess Housewives is one example where I've seen it, where, they're working on a line of bikinis because you wonder, why does this person supposedly wealthy and whatever, why do they want to do this? And I always want to ask them, why
Yeah.
do you want to do this, right? You're going to
It's
expose
easier than
yourself.
Shark Tank. That's why.
I don't know if it's easier than Shark Tank. I think it can be more
Yeah.
it can be more difficult. You get yourself into situations with these shows that aren't always like you experienced yourself that you didn't really want
Yeah.
to. So some of them do come on with brands, but then you get some, and we do a lot with people who represent certain minority populations. We get indigenous people, for example, who feel it's important for other indigenous people to see people like them on TV because you don't see that representation. I get various, immigrant groups, minority groups who say to me, you don't see. It's funny because we always have gay people on the shows, right? But then I always get somebody who says, well, the gay people you have aren't like me. They aren't the right gay people that you should be showing, right? And I said, well, what is it about you that makes you different from, so and so that we had on the last time? Well, I'm more assertive, or I'm more athletic, or I'm more X or Y. So there are people who really want to represent a group of people, and that's what they stand for. And they want to do good in the world, and they want to show other people that they exist, and that they can be nice people like everyone else.
Would you say one of the common themes are kind of like you talked about the young kid in his basement is to be famous? Or maybe I'll make it more specific, like what percent? Because I think that's a big one. If people want to be seen, they want to be recognized, basic human psychological factors. What percent is that?
It's hard to say, and it depends on the show. There are a percent who want to be famous. There are some who tell me they really don't want to be famous, but they love the nature of the game. You get
Hmm.
something like Traders, where it's like a murder mystery. They just love the game. Some of them say, I really don't want to be on TV. Can I do this without it being shown to everybody? Because I want to play that game.
Yeah.
So that happens. And some people are in it for the money, right? The prize money. Could be $250,000 or whatever, and they're straight out honest. I just want to win the money. I owe money on my mortgage, and my family's in debt. I'll do anything to win that. I'll be in the woods for a month eating animal insects. I want to win this thing. So you get all these different motivations. It's the challenge of the game. Some want the fame. Some want to build their brand. They're straight up front. I'm selling whatever. I'm a party guy, and I sell myself to organized parties, and I want the world to see me and hire me.
Yeah.
So it's amazing all the different options that you find on there.
Well, it's funny here. We're kind of coming to the end of the show, and this is going way too fast, Steve. We got to get you back sooner. After decades of studying leadership and emotional intelligence, resilience, and human behavior, what's one insight from reality TV, amass in aggregate, that every leader could apply tomorrow, no matter what kind of organization they're running?
Well, there's probably two things that stand out to me. And one, as I sort of alluded to, was this empathy, this ability to read other people, to pay attention, to find out what they really want, what's really important for them. But the second thing that really I find important is flexibility. The other archetype I didn't really talk about is the chameleon, the
Hmm.
person who can kind of change and be flexible based on the situation. And in our lives, we need a certain amount of flexibility to navigate situations. So leaders who can, as you were saying, things are changing so quick. AI is coming in, and all these other innovations
Hmm.
changing rapidly. So we have to be flexible. We have to be willing
Yeah.
to figure out where we're going to go next and be willing to make that
Yeah.
change. So empathy and flexibility are probably the two biggest things I feel are important.
And Kathy, that goes back to your elasticity of identity is the flexibility.
Yeah.
So maybe a quick take on AI and EI. I mean, like you said, and I'm sure you get asked this, Kathy and I get asked this. So what's your response?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, AI is great for certain things, but it's never going to replace us, right? In terms of how we make decisions, in terms of the emotional component that we put into dealing with people, AI is never going to replace us. And that's why emotional intelligence has become more and more important, even in spite of all the
Hmm.
automation. I remember early on, we had people from Facebook, whatever the Meta, I guess it is, come
Right.
to us, and they wanted us to help them emulate EI as part of their systems, and we said no, we're not doing that. I don't think that's a good idea. So we kind of avoided that. I don't think the AI is ever going to be as real as you and I are when we talk to each other and we make decisions and we weigh different things in how we make those decisions. You're not going to get that. AI is very logical and it's going to continue to be
Yeah.
logical and it's going to do routine tasks really well, really quickly. I'll use it to help me edit a document or whatever, but it's not going to be the heart and soul of what I do. And you're going to be able to tell the heart and soul of what I do because the emotions are more real and not
Uh,
artificial.
Absolutely. My motto is there is no AI without EI, and I put it on everything.
That's
So,
good.
so Stephen, we're going to end with our little lightning round, and you just kind of complete the sentence. So leadership is,
Having people who want to follow you,
okay. And at work, it's all about,
having fun.
okay, that's a good one. And then also we didn't really talk a lot about kind of people's personal wellness, but I always think, for leaders, this question about what do you do during the work day to recharge? Not afterwards, but how about for you? What do you do during the day to recharge?
I take walks around the office or outside.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Kat.
No, I just want to say thank you so much, Stephen, for spending time with us today. One of my favorite scientists. Can't get enough. And for those of you who want to get more, you can see behind Stephen, there are an array of books, but you can go to mhs.com backslash about dash us backslash. You can also do Stephen dot Stein at MHS.com. And I think it's really important that we all come together these days to support each other through emotional intelligence. And I couldn't think of a better person to help support that. Thanks for being with us today, Steve. It's been amazing.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's always great to see you too.
Thanks, Steve. Really
Uh,
appreciate it. Okay,
uh,
goodbye, folks. We'll
uh.
tune in next week to tune up your performance.